Good afternoon, dear friends. Today in the studio of Channel 56, we have a very unique and long-awaited guest, Viktor Alekseevich Efimov. Hello, thank you. Hello, Viktor Alekseevich. Although I often watch you, I'm glad to welcome you to the studio of Channel 56. This is your first time as a guest. You have identified the topic of the ecosystem of creation. So, I would like, perhaps, to start with the following. Considering that most of the terms we use in everyday life are upside down in meaning, and we ourselves sometimes have no idea what processes we are launching, because in the beginning, as we know, the word proclaims a certain process that we launch with our intention. How would you characterize these two words, the ecosystem of creation, and what meanings do you put into them, and how high, in your opinion, are these meanings? Why did these terms appear? They appeared because humanity, in our understanding, has reached a civilizational impasse, frankly speaking. That is, we are not talking about those crises that periodically appear, then resolve themselves, disappear. Today, the situation is different. Humanity has entered a phase of collapse. And in the phase of collapse, we are talking about identifying new meanings, including new concepts. You see, when Copernicus tried to change the idea of celestial mechanics, it was impossible to somehow explain it in the old terms. The Earth's firmament and celestial dome. The terms globe and solar system appeared. So, in my understanding, the term ecosystem of creation is very deep in meaning. In essence, it is about the transition to other principles of functioning of humanity as a whole. What has the global governance system consisted of until now? Well, the well-known principle of divide and conquer. You look at all the countries there, so to speak, North Korea, South Korea. We are seeing this now there in the example of Ukraine too. Yes, yes, yes. There you go. Divide and conquer. The Russian world was divided, and after that, so to speak, and today we need a system of global civilization that would replace the thesis of victory in war with the thesis of victory over wars. So, can we find a model, even if it is hypothetical for now, difficult to implement, but in general, what is the end result? What kind of humanity would we like to see? So this is a humanity who, in my understanding, we would like to see in the form of an ecosystem of creation. An ecosystem is, therefore, the interaction of the most diverse phenomena, but just like in nature. And by the way, our president said about this on November 27th, 2022, that we value natural diversity. Butterflies, snakes, swallows. This is an ecosystem when everyone lives in their own community. But fox does not build chicken coops and do not teach how, so to speak, to lay eggs. But it turns out that with us, just as we value diversity in nature, we need to value diversity in human society. That is, people are different, geographical conditions are different, and there is no need to impose some one truth on everyone. We have already been through this. We built in one column, that's it, a person in another. There is no need to build. We need to create a model according to which we will agree that everyone will live the way they consider necessary. And the interaction between these communities, states, must be built in such a way that they do not harm each other. Here is creation. Well, if I explained it in a nutshell according to this system, then there is the term creation. It is an order of magnitude deeper. Here our work is translated into English by such a professional team. There are Russian-speaking and English-speaking guys. So, there are words that cannot be translated from Russian. Letters like conscience, sovest, for example, and like creation, sozidani. Here, sozidani, creation, if you look at the images of Old Slavic Bukvica, then there is no such word in foreign languages. And there are no analogs in Russian, although if you type in synonyms, you will find a dozen synonyms, but this is wrong. So, dani, creation, in the images of Old Slavic Bukvica, is the preservation of the diversity created by God. This is not the growth of something, but God created diversity, and here is how to support and preserve it. This is sozidani, creation. And in this sense, sozidani, creation, it is a priori, not combined with the term evil. That is, we often say synonyms, development, but technogenic development, for example, can lead to something that God forbid. Yes, that is, you can destroy yourself and destroy the globe, and all this will be due to development. So zidani, creation, it contains the root basis zid. This is clay. Clay is a figurative expression of ether, that from which God created there in the Quran. We are also talking about the same translation that God created all this from clay, so in it is important to preserve this divine clay. This ether, because everything is formed from ether, and the most valuable thing that a person can create is to preserve this diversity both in nature and in human society. We should also break down the word clay by the Bukvica figuratively. Yes, I think that we will be very surprised. Therefore, in my opinion, the term ecosystem of creation is extremely deep in its worldview meaning. And it says that, yes, there are different communities, they interact with each other, and the system as a whole is built in such a way that the protocol of interaction between them is expressed through nravstvennost, morality, through God's providence, through justice. That is, only when do two systems begin to interact, when their interaction corresponds to the protocol of justice. Maybe I would even like it not to be through nravstvennost, but through love, probably. Yes, well, ultimately, we often say that God is love, and it is known that any action, any term, if you miss love there, then you will get something opposite. So I guess I agree with your clarification that the ecosystem of creation is a system that is built on the love of communities for each other. The model of our development is a tree. Not a pyramid, but a tree where each nation is a separate branch. And let it develop the way it wants. And there is no need to teach anyone. There is no need to re-educate crazy Europe, because when we pay attention to them, we give energy there. Where attention goes, energy goes. And we need to do our own thing. But just tell the other communities that let's agree, you like it this way, you live this way, and we live differently. This is the essence of the ecosystem of creation. I just had this image. You said something about a tree. Look how interesting it turns out. That is, if we look at a tree, let's say, dug out of the ground, then it has a crown and a root system. That is, upon closer examination, you can imagine it as a torus. That is, these branches and the root system, they should intertwine together, and then you get a torus. And torusness, it is everywhere with us, a fractality in torus and everything else. So your system, if you imagine it as a kind of tree, then it is viable and can develop in this harmony. Yes, there are a lot of different types of analogies here. The roots of this history, the past, the future, the trunk. This is a single, fairly general theory of management. It is one way or another an objective law of being. That is, each branch will live well if it takes into account the objective laws of being. And if it does not understand this and believes that a person is, say, androgynous. Well, an androgynous is a leech. We know that, yes, it can do both, and if people perceive themselves this way, well, this branch is dead. It will dry up sooner or later if, again, this branch perceives itself as a leech in the sense of the economy of parasitism, then a person is also created differently. He is not created for. This is Western civilization. It is also the one that has been reached a dead end that's That's exactly why. That's why you're talking about it. But our problem, unfortunately, is that we, all attention, turn on Russia 1 TV channel, and you won't hear anything there except Europe and America, and they'll endlessly broadcast all their videos to you. It's propaganda, what mercenaries fight for, say that all terrorists are fighting for, so that they can be shown on TV. They're ready to give us their lives for this, and we constantly show them for free. And this, of course, is our problem. We shouldn't be doing this at all. We need to finally mind our own business. This is to analyze. This is to talk about, and talk about Sozidani, creation, and not about troubles and problems. It seems to me that balance is important here. Harmony is needed because we remember the Soviet Union and also one-sidedness. It did not have a very good effect on what we found ourselves in, at what point we found ourselves later. Therefore, balance must be maintained. We must understand what is happening in the world, but nevertheless, as if you are absolutely right in noting that pumping such an amount of energy there of your own, well, yes, it is unreasonable, but the strangeness of our development is what it is based on. A fairly deep systemic theory of management. On the one hand, it is based on moral premises, and it, in essence, offers a moral path for Russia and for the world. Well, and the second, perhaps, strangeness is that our development has deep engineering calculations and justifications. It turns out that everything that we talk about in the field of humanities, morality, justice, all this is perfectly translated into the language of today's digital technologies. And we have an obvious, serious team in this area. And here, in particular, Dmitry Kostin, he is actually from Tomsk, but now lives in the United States. And he is a profound specialist in the development of architecture for solving management problems. And he did this for computer systems, but there is also ultimately some goal behind it. And if the goal is not designated, then there is no management. It must always be targeted, because unfortunately, in our country, management is often understood as management of structures, and a management of structures in a fairly general theory of management. This is the 6th stage. In complete management function, there are 7 stages, and when structures are created at the 5th stage, they do not fall from the sky. They crystallize from the first 4 stages. And when the structures are created, then the 6th stage is included. This is the management of structures, control over their actions, then say liquidation if they have served their purpose. Unfortunately, in our management science, this is most often understood by management, but the 6th stage, it is no longer associated with the term management in the Russian language. If we talk about this word, because pravilny, management, comes from the word pravda, truth, pravednost, righteousness, spravedlivist, justice. So in our soul, we have this understanding of what management is, and the 6th stage is administration. You are already working for the one who built the stage for you. So unfortunately, we have such a story that the structure, they were created because if we talk about the complete management function, let's just list what it starts with. Everything starts with identifying the environmental factor that prevents you from living. That is, for what? Because if everything is good, there is no need to manage. This means that everything is self-managed in the mode you need. Management begins only when there is something interfering, and you build a goal vector in relation to this interfering. This is already the 3rd stage, the formation of the goal vector. Somehow compensate for what you don't like. The 4th stage is the formation of the concept of achieving the goal. And only at the 5th stage are structures created. but they are not created so that they can live well and earn good money. They are created in order to achieve the goal that was set at the very beginning. So what do you think? In the early 90s, who set what goals for the currently existing management structures? Well, certainly not us ourselves. Yes, the president has repeatedly said who was sitting in the Kremlin at the time. And what structures do you think were being built in order to create a competitor for themselves, or conversely, to make sure that, God forbid, some competitor would form here? I try to track, yes, what the president says, what the top officials of the state say. I try to put it all together as a big picture. It doesn't always work out because there is some kind of disunity. In my understanding, there is no common vision. And why is this bad? Because when we don't see a clearly and distinctly conscious goal in front of us, then we can end up in the wrong place in principle, and we conceived this goal and no one has outlined it to this day. Seems to me the basic problem lies because of Vladimir Vladimirovich came out and said that our goal is this, then let this goal be discussed. It may outgrow it over time, be transformed in some way, but nevertheless it should be there. Of course, this is a sign of sovereign statehood and a sign of conceptual authority, because in any society, there is always a concept of governance, but it can be either one's own or someone else's, either publicly announced or hidden under the carpet. Yes, that's it, actually, because there is no governance when, so to speak, here it is, well, sort of, because in order to understand what is happening now, as I already said, new terms are needed. So, you and I discussed that the ecosystem of creation, in our understanding, is a model of the functioning of humanity without wars. If we have agreed on this, and we live then the goal is clear. We are moving towards this model. We are not re-educating anyone. We are doing our own thing. Each nation lives the way it wants, and a community is formed where the interaction protocols are close to each other. Whoever wants to live by the rules established by the United States, for God's sake, they will form there. They will be formed, and then time will judge, and God will judge which communities will develop and have strategic continuation, and which will simply collapse sooner or later. So, there are exactly the same terms without which it is impossible to understand the current moment and build the future. I'll give you a couple of terms today and show you where their misunderstanding comes from, because many things are incomprehensible to us, not because our concepts are weak, but because these things are simply not included in the circle of our concepts. So today, everyone understands that somehow governance is structured in such a way that neither the president nor the government, but someone else governs, right? And look at what we do. Suddenly, Trump throws out an idea, deep state, right? Then someone says, world government. And we swallow these terms. Well, guys, this is where it all starts with terms. And if we are American, and I am surprised when our analysts don't even translate from English, even, well, someone says in translation, someone even says deep state. We introduced their term into our language, and we, back in the 90s, on this matter, realizing that there is something that is what we are talking about. Yes, there is some kind of management, but it is not named, somehow said, well, someone called it a world government. Then, oh, conspiracy theory. So how does it turn out that something exists, but there is no word? Remember the joke about Vavochka? He also said the same thing. Maria Ivanovna, I understand how this is. It exists, but there is no word. It's exactly the same with us. Well, gentlemen scientists, how it is with you. You understand that there is something, so you introduce a term so that you can understand if there is no term, then there is no concept, because a concept is the unity of the word and an image. We have an image, yes. We see how they manage, but there is no word. Well, that means there is no concept. And we introduced a term that clearly characterizes this phenomenon in Russia. We call it a global predictor. Absolutely strictly scientific terms and terms that are understandable in English, including we specifically took such terms so that they could be adequately translated into English. Global is understandable because the management that we observe concerns the entire globe. This was especially evident during COVID, and it has always been visible to thinking people. The term global is obvious. And a predictor is a deeply scientific term because there are three types of management. Management can be programmatic, and according to the program, it is already clear you do. It can be software adaptive when there is a program, but you are constantly adjusting something. And there is management according to the predictor-corrector scheme. This is when you manage not on the basis of the information that you have today, but you predict the future based on today's situation. You predict what will happen in 10 years, and based on this forecast, you make adjustments to the current management, not because of what has already happened, but because it can happen. So we have studied this in detail, that this global civilization management of humanity is going exactly according to the scheme. And as soon as we introduced this term, absolutely understandable in Russian, we would immediately explain everything. And besides, if we talk about the scheme, then the algorithm of management itself immediately becomes clear, because when they tell you, then a world government, a deep state, this is a hint of structural methods of management. The state, then, the government, these are structures. But there is no structure, and therefore we need another term, which is absolutely necessary. If we do not understand this term, then we will never understand what management is. Look at what all the great analysts are doing today. They're studying who is managing the world. Again, everything stems from this. Who, that is, a subject is being sought, some kind of structure is being sought. And we say, no, we need to figure out how the world is managed, because the world is governed without structure. That is the whole peculiarity that we do not understand. And many of us, I even saw such a question on TV today. How? What are you talking about? Structured management? That can't be. That doesn't happen. And we say that it does, because structureless management is precisely those first 5 stages that I spoke about. They are all done without structure, and from these stages, a structure crystallizes. Either one or the other structure appears depending on what information is circulating in the country. For example, Stalin's state bank appeared on the basis of one piece of information, and our central bank appeared on the basis of another piece of information. It didn't just fall out of the sky, right? So that's how it went, the management. But it went in an unstructured way. And now they manage in an unstructured way through another concept. It's necessary in order to understand it more deeply. We say that there are super systems, but we again introduced this term like a global predictor. This is a new term. There was no such thing. And you don't like to see another one, but not deep state, because it's about nothing. It doesn't explain anything. Yes, it doesn't explain anything. The term itself must contain something. So when we talk about a super system, in the late 80s, we introduced this term, gave it a clear definition. A supersystem is a set of elements that are in some ways identical to each other, partly interchangeable, and these elements can interact with each other, receive information from the outside, receive information from each other, and self-manage based on this information. What is it to understand what a supersystem is then? Because, firstly, it is not super, but because you have three elements that can already form a supersystem. And secondly, it is not a system here is the trick, because a system always has some goal. Let's say a kettle is a system, because its goal is to boil water. But a supersystem is different in that it has no goal. It is a community that is introduced into an environment simply to survive in this environment, and that's it. A school of fish is a supersystem. A herd of horses is a supersystem. A community of people walking down the street or in the subway or riding in an elevator is a supersystem. They have nothing in common, they don't even know each other, but it's a supersystem because they can tell each other something, pass something on if they want to. And how do they manage supersystems? Only then will we understand how humanity is managed, when we understand how supersystems are managed. And supersystems are controlled by introducing information into the supersystem. For example, you have a school of fish. You are observing the school and want to drive it into scene. But there are no structures there. There is no one to stay. Come on, we will pay you now. Come on, drag it over there. No, there are no structures. How is it controlled then? One made some noise here. The second made some noise there. The third made some noise there. The fish simply listen. They look at each other, listen, and little by little the danger flows there. And as a result, everyone ends up in the scene. So they work in exactly the same way, not only with horses, not only with fish, but also with people. It has long been noted that any biological community has the effect of the so-called auto-synchronization into any community. From fireflies, the ancient Egyptian priesthood noticed, to a herd of horses, that is, fish, a school of fish, a flock of birds or people. If 5 to 10% start something synchronously, let's run somewhere, then the whole herd will fly after these horses, and even into the abyss, even into the fire, it will fly away. If 10% of the fish broke away, the whole school swam there. If you are in the theater, there are people sitting. This is a super system. A theater, there are people sitting. And someone seated 5% of those present in this hall and wrote a program for one, said that when such and such an artist comes out, you need to clap. And when there is another one, there you need to stomp. That's it. And another 10 people are looking at this little person, and there are still 5 of them there. Well, we counted, and that's it. And what happens? And it turns out that the right moment, the entire hall joins in on the applause. And when you look at this hall, one person out of 100 may not applaud. All the rest join in this feature of the super system. And this is how humanity is controlled, and we do not introduce these terms and do not understand, guys, how is control implemented? Through the injunction of information, and we speak, and we have freedom of speech, and we are proud of it, not understanding that the control of the human community is carried out precisely through information. Information is the only tool for controlling supersystems. Or through the absence of information. Yes, or blocking this information. Here, the information comes from somewhere, and you turned on some resources and do not let it in. This is also management, and there are no other management tools except for launching information, and we, therefore, do not perceive this as a management process. We say, no, guys, we have freedom of speech. Come, speak. We recently went through, bought 900 little books, just now on sale, children's books, and analyzed them. 63% of these books are devoted to only 5 topics. The first is betrayal. If you betray, then you will always live well. The second is there is no difference between boys and girls. Boys and girls, it's all the same, and so on and so forth. Third, there, then, never think about the future, and so on. I will not list all this. It is now given in different places, then. So, and there is a well-known ancient Chinese principle. If you want to defeat the enemy, educate his children. So, guys, today, during a special military operation, these children's books, they are financed, well, I say, by Norwegian fund, a British fund. And I have a lot of guys who write amazing, meaningful children's books. They're very expensive. They could not be published at personal expense. And those are published because this is a terrible weapon. It is much more dangerous than military weapons. That's what I'm talking about. Therefore, it is no coincidence that when we talk about the ecosystem of creation, we work through all these management tools there. How it is managed, because management, the real in the ecosystem, goes on 6 priorities of generalized means of managing social systems. And the most formidable and most dangerous is the worldview methodological one, where the goals and meanings of life are set. In second place is the historical algorithmic one. That is, when you present history one way or another, it is like in our tree, you have roots, and accordingly, your future will be such as your roots. Well, everyone understands this today. The third priority is ideology. These are just books. These are religions. These are heroes, one or another. And so the fourth priority is world money. This is information on paper or electronic media, and this is a control tool, and nothing else. This is a control tool. The fifth priority is gene, weapons, alcohol, tobacco, drugs. This is a control tool and a much more formidable one than the sixth priority, military weapons. Because when you use military weapons, you hit a specific person, right? But if you shoot someone with a gene weapon, then you shoot his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren. And now the biggest threat that threatens our country is, will the Ivans follow in the footsteps of the Chingaguks? That is the question. And it is no coincidence that Donbass today, I am a member of the political council of the public movement, Donetsk Republic, and they invited me. I spent a week there visiting all the schools. They asked, work with our children on the subject of alcohol, tobacco, and so on. And at this time, I see on October 5th in Moscow, the founding congress of the Beer Lovers Party is taking place. And if we remember Onyshchenko, yes, a very smart man, he once said that Russia will be destroyed not by some kind of viruses, not by anything else, but by beer alcoholism among the younger generation. Because through beer, a child embarks on the path to drinking alcoholic beverages in the future. This is the basis of our developments in the field of the ecosystem of creation. By the way, I really want to advise all our viewers to watch the speech by our president on October 27th, 2022, where he will discuss in detail, in essence, without naming it directly, but he talks about the ecosystem of creation. Russia is not challenging the elites of the West. Russia is simply defending its right to exist and free development. At the same time, we ourselves are not going to become some kind of new hegemon. Russia does not propose replacing unipolarity with bipolarity, tripolarity, and so on. The dominance of the West with the dominance of the East, North, or South would inevitably lead to a new impasse. I would like to quote here the great Russian philosopher Nikolai Yakovlevich Danilevsky, who believed that progress does not consist in everyone going in one direction, as some of our opponents is pushing us to do. In that case, progress would soon cease, as Danilevsky, but in moving across the entire field that constitutes the arena of historical activity of mankind in all directions. And he adds that no civilization can be proud of representing the highest point of development. I am convinced that dictatorship can only be countered by the freedom of development of countries and peoples, degradation of personality, love for man as a creator, primitive simplification and prohibitions, the flourishing complexity of cultures and traditions. And not only did we work through all of this, but we also put it into and already in engineering solutions because, let's say, if we talk about the fourth financial priority, what are we talking about? What is money in general from the point of view of public benefit, from the point of view of forming the well-being of the people, because our Constitution states that therefore the benefits of the people. This is, so to speak, the main goal. So from the point of view of these constitutional requirements, what should the financial system look like? What is its positive function? The financial system, in essence, has the only and main functional purpose to build relationships between producers and consumers, not in order to earn money ourselves, but in order to build relationships. And the most important thing that the financial system does not guarantee trust. That is, we agreed, but what if you don't give me the goods? Or what if you don't pay me the money? That's why they pay the money, but not to the person who produced the goods, but to the bank. The bank acts as a guarantor. But today, blockchain technology can easily perform this function. You just need a platform. And relationships are built on this platform. They can be built without banks, without interest, without inflation, and without the money that we today call, so to speak, this function. But how will it work? Well, that means that the issuers of money will not be just anyone, bankers, but producers of goods. What will it look like? You produced a product that society needs as you think. But it's not a fact that it's needed. But when you've produced it, that's the first step. And the second is when they shake your hand and say, yes, we'll take this product. And as soon as a contract appears, a digital image of this project is created for this contract. And this digital feature appears on this platform. And this is money, because this is what can now be exchanged. This is a digital product. These products appear on this platform, and then there is an exchange of these product features. Someone will say this is mysticism. This is unrealizable. Absolutely realizable. This is how it works in practice already. Yes, look, there are even laws on cooperation. Cooperation is like this. There are hundreds of interacting entities there. They don't need any money. They have a list of goods that they have, and you produce the goods, give them the cooperative community, you receive a share. There you go. For this share, you can take any other goods. Well, now create a cooperative named Russia, and that's it. What does money have to do with it? What do banks have to do with it? Because today, if you look at where things are thick and where they are empty, then you don't need to tell me where we earn money. At least not those who produce the goods. Completely different people earn money. So when I tell you about these 6 priorities, we have everything worked out in great detail for each priority. And why these priorities are not accepted by the management system today is absolutely incomprehensible, because it explains everything. It explains the phenomenon of Ukraine. Look at all these 6 priorities, goals and meanings. History as presented to children. Yes, Ukraine is a great state. It gave birth to Jesus Christ, dug out the Black Sea, and the only ones who have always prevented them from living are the Muscovites. That is why children from the age of 5 know that as soon as we get rid of the Muscovites, we will become the capital of the globe. That is history, right? Now further, ideological priority, please some new heroes, Bandera, and so on. Money. Yes, money is flowing. All these priorities are higher. Money, everyone says. The world is ruled by money. Nothing of the sort. Money flows where higher priorities, in particular ideological ones, tell it to. If you also come out today saying that Russia is wrong about something, money will flow to you immediately. That's how Ukraine positioned itself, and billions flowed there. It's not money that controls, it's ideas. And there is, from my point of view, another priority of the KOB does not take into account. I once, in one of my very first videos, you can watch it on my channel, already talked about this. This priority, from my point of view, it generally stands above all these six. This is the priority of interaction with the subtle plane, because if we take that Ukraine, then there was such a field hanging over it, pumped up with specially trained people and equipment, which reformatted the brain so much that I simply saw it on the example of my friends, how it works, how a person's consciousness is blocked. Here we studied together at the academy, hugged, knew each other, went to visit, and then suddenly he collapses. He says, "Until you put on an embroidered shirt, you don't have to come here." But I look at him and understand that this isn't happening in physics. It's happening on the subtle plane. They just hung him up and blocked his consciousness. This is also a very important priority, because if we don't understand him, we don't understand him. We realize and we won't work with it. But it's very difficult to build on physics. It's built there first. Yes, but when we talk about worldview, methodological aspects, there is, of course, a very powerful module. It presupposes everything. It presupposes, first of all, the understanding that there is God, the Creator and the Almighty. In my understanding, by God, I mean an all-pervading, all-encompassing, thinking, ethereal essence. And I perceived a person as a unity of a body, spirit, and soul, and also consciousness, an important world. No, that's not entirely true. I just want to say that in our terms, and when you touch the spirit and soul, then all of this is embedded there. Consciousness is already a part of the human spirit, and the soul is just an ethereal essence. Therefore, the entire subtle plane, all mental levels, they are embedded either in the spirit or in the soul of a person, because the soul as an ethereal essence is why we say the divine likeness of a person, because he, just like God, his soul is an ethereal essence. Therefore, everything that is in a person and the psyche and the mental level and everything, they are embedded in these three basic foundations of a person: body, spirit, and soul. Another thing is that we do not engage in spiritual food at all. Spiritual cooking, it means much more to human health and to the health of the state than such material food. We have entire channels dedicated to cooking. But what is spiritual cooking? And why, for example, I even go to a fitness center near me. There is terrible music there. And I say, guys, is it possible you are disfiguring people? I feel it through the spirit, how it all distorts everything. I go there now with construction headphones because there is something more terrible there than when you saw through metal. It is not as scary as what is playing there. And what do they tell me? You know, we bought Western equipment. It assumes the use of only licensed music. Franchise, yes. And that's it. Well, guys, isn't that management? That's the spiritual cooking that we don't realize. That's where after all, this is a separate topic. It's not by chance that I have this concept of God, man, because that's where the basic questions of existence come from. What is man? Is there a God? Is there life after death? I just didn't want to get into a discussion about all of these questions today, because I have a course, that's what it's called, a school of managing yourself, your country, your civilization. We examine these questions there in great detail, and we'll move this to the next program. Yes, maybe, that's it, but there is another very important component when we talk about the managers of the ecosystem of creation, because the ecosystem of creation is First of all, the formation of creation. It must prepare people who are capable of implementing these mechanisms. This is the economy of creation. This is the culture of creation. And here, actually, the most important thing is to understand that management, upravlení, again, that which comes from the word pravednost, righteousness, spravedlnost, justice, it begins with the type of structure of the human psyche. That is, if you do not take this into account, then you will get a completely different result. A manager can be guided by very different methods because we are talking about the complete function of management, about these 7 stages. That is, I will remind you once again that the first stage is like recognizing environmental factors that interfere with your life, and this factor is recognized through the psyche. That is, one manager is irritated by one thing, and there is no Parmesan cheese, and the second is irritated by another. The teachers there have low salaries, and they teach his children poorly. So it is very important we have considered all of this in detail from the point of view of the formation of the psyche, not according to Freud. There are, so to speak, cholerics, sanguine people, but from the point of view of how the human psyche affects management algorithms, management architecture, and the well-being of society. He can be guided either by instincts, when instinct is simply in the first place. There are a lot of such people. The second level of types of construction psychology is when a person is guided by generally accepted norms. Well, why do you do this? Because everyone does it. That is, the stereotype is formed, which is then imposed, and people, like a school of fish, go where they need to. The third type of construction psychology is demonic. These are strong-willed ones, not those who swim on the waves like the previous ones, but strong-willed individuals. But they are atheists. They go wherever I want. And only the fourth type are people who possess. They have a developed instinctive system and developed socialization and subjectivity. They also understand what it is, and they are real subjects in management. But in the first place, for them is a sense of conscience and faith in God, if you like. That is, they understand that there is something that is above us. What to call it is another question. The supreme intelligence, the Creator, the Almighty, but let's say, if you take the word Allah in the Quran, there is the root, yes, generalizing everything. And the other 2 letters are exactly the one who launched everything that exists now. That is, it is clear that this exists. Again, what to call this term, but everyone understands that the Creator of the Almighty exists. And here's the manager who understands this, and who understands that there is also the noosphere, and that there are such playful communities at the state level, business, and all this must be taken into account. These are the managers from God, as we say for good reason, the managers from God who feel this. This is an important point, and it must be taken into account. Therefore, if you look at what we are proposing today, I would like to say, by the way, that the day before yesterday, on November 16th, the problem of forming a creative ecosystem was discussed at the high-level BRICS Expert Council. The president of the Expert Council, Mikhail Mikhailovich Krivonosov, and the basic foundational documents were adopted, and apparently a special journal will be published based on the results of this discussion, and there was a fairly wide range of participants, and all these issues were considered deeply and in essence at what level. The fact is that today, if you look, there are, well, one would say, 4 options for the development of humanity in the future. The first option is the dollar pyramid. Yes, it exists now. Somehow patch it up somewhere, fix it, so to speak, well, and maybe live like this further. This is the first option, with which, as we can see, the majority of nations do not agree. The second option is what China is proposing. This is a social rating system. In essence, this is also a pyramid, but a pyramid built of little people, but it's anti-human. Well, what is it built on? It is built on the fact that it is possible to ensure unity and togetherness at the expense of uniformity. That is, if all people are made the same at the expense of suppression, then there will be unity. But they somehow need to be made the same. And we say no. The third system is a system, if you like, that's the Schwab is proposing. It's a kind of Zuckerberg meta-universe. They say we'll have a digital platform, everything will be free there, and we've been through this for a long time. We know that such systems are controlled through the formation of external environmental factors. The external environment, information is entered, and it will already be clear what. And the fourth model that we are proposing is precisely the ecosystem of creation. This is already, if there are such pyramids there, then here is a tree. I'd like to talk a little bit about this system in more detail if possible. What does it consist of? What are the basic principles and actually what goals and objectives should be set for this ecosystem? The goals and objectives are to achieve harmony of diversity. That is, to accept a priori that both nature and human societies should be diverse, different people, different states, and this is great, and this is creation, so this diversity, and we need to preserve. Can you imagine if then the Indians had been conquered not by Europeans, but by Russians, we would not have exterminated them. Guaranteed. And can you imagine what interest that culture that was generated by the Indians would have been for all of humanity? They went a completely different way. It is incomprehensible to them now. They somehow buy land together with the rustle of water and the rustle of leaves. And the Europeans, that is, put everyone under their own comb. Therefore, the principle of the ecosystem of creation is divine diversity, support for this divine diversity and building interactions based on moral protocols on the basis of morality and justice, as I said, that they interact with each other only when it is beneficial for them to do so. And if not, they live in parallel universes because you can live in a universe of love, you can live in a universe of fear, you can live in a universe of hatred. It's like these universes, they intersect, but they do not interfere with each other. This is the essence of the ecosystem of creation, and it is not at all aimed at teaching anyone how to live. And our president has repeatedly emphasized this, that we are not building this against anyone. So BRICS is partly being formed today that is not against anyone. And the president, after all, grates on the ear for many, and many will not agree with this. When the president says that we are not against America, we say, let's, guys, interact, but not on the basis of the rules that you wrote, but on the basis of jointly agreed rules. A global problem, from my point of view, I could be wrong. The global problem is that if there is an ecosystem based on love, then development in this system is endless, boundless. Another ecosystem, which is based on the principles of fear, for example, has ceilings in its development. That is a result, the management and members of the system run into a certain ceiling. And then it has a choice. Either reformat, if you go over to the side of love, or start, as they are doing now, or start trying to bite off some pieces from those who are already more or less of some kind, some interest. And here the complete destruction of this entire paradigm occurs. Because this ecosystem cannot live for a long time only due to development in fear. The thing is that we are talking about that part of the universe where Russia and BRICS are We propose, we ourselves want to live like this. But someone, if they want. We don't need to live differently. That way, he will hit the ceiling and go, come to us. Yes, God will judge. He will come to us later. Yes, it will happen much faster than if we try to somehow exterminate these bad people. No, we are not trying to exterminate anyone. That's what I'm talking about. That's the principle of the ecosystem. Because it says, what are you talking about? Europe, they need to. What do we need? Should we send them to the moon? Or are we thinking about how to exterminate them? That's not human. That's not godly. That's because everything exists from God. No. From our point of view, it's clear to me, but from the point of view of the ecosystem that has reached a logical impasse, it then starts pestering us with its own, which means not entirely godly principles and rules. Here we are, so as not to get confused in terms, an ecosystem is just an assembly of everything and everyone. But they do not have an ecosystem, and we do not have an ecosystem. We can build a system internally, but it must be built taking into account the framework of this global ecosystem of human existence, which assumes the presence of such people and such states and such and such and such. So this ecosystem simply defines the principles of their interaction with each other without hostility and shooting, so that they do not try to remake everyone in their own way, but live the way they like, and no one would oppose it. The fact is the essential of an ecosystem. Not in pitting one ecosystem against another, but in building this diversity within the framework of an ecosystem where all the models are spelled out, mathematically spelled out, at the legal, contracted level, it's all spelled out. How does governance arise in this ecosystem? It initially goes according to full function, and it goes. Just as I was telling you, the structures, they are already a consequence of the information that functions in this universe, the micro-universe. Here we have one information. On the basis of this information, some structures. The West has different information. They have other structures. But these structures, we agree among ourselves that, guys, we don't object, live the way you want, and we will live the way we want. That's it. I get it now. Yes, that's the point. In your view, everything you talked about today, this whole wonderful structure, that means in what time frame can it be formed under the most favorable conditions if they develop like that? You know, I live by the principle that the main thing is not where we are, but where we are moving. That is the question. Because if we start moving in the right direction, then, if you like, the breeze of omnipotence, God's guidance, turns on if we are on God's righteous path. And the alternative to this will be the fate of those civilizations that existed before ours. There was Atlantis, that's obvious. There were other civilizations. So today, if we accept this new model and realize it all together, then the question here is probably not in the timing, but in the direction of movement. Here is a movement in this direction. It becomes, as they say, pleasing to God. And already on the basis of this alone, people begin to find happiness from the moment they realize where we are going. Today, not in the world. Today it is Rus that must offer the world a new model of human existence. In fact, in this we see the mission of Holy Rus. Let it be so. Thank you. Thank you for meeting. All the best.